What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Claims Podcast. I'm here with Tim Christ, author and claims specialist. Tim, thanks so much for being on the show.
Thanks, Matt, for having me. I appreciate the invite.
Of course. You've got quite a background, I think, between being an author, being a professor, having analytics in your background. There's a lot going on there, and obviously it all melts together pretty well to make a great claims specialist. We'd love to know about your background. Walk us through maybe a little bit about your history and how you landed where you are today.
Sure. So it's, as a lot of people in the insurance business will attest to, I literally fell into it. It definitely wasn't something I was looking for. As a professional golfer, I got recruited by a guy that was running a forensic engineering firm. And he found out I had a business and marketing degree. And he said, I want you to come in and learn what we do, and then I want you to go sell it. And so that was really kind of what started my whole foray into the insurance world. But I think, as you know, with your background being in the investment banking and private equity space, I think you'll appreciate, once I got in there, I ended up executing a couple of strategic turnarounds of business units that were not profitable and making them profitable again. And then ended up deciding that I wanted to build a business down in Mexico. Was able to do that a little bit with my first firm. Then they decided they wanted to get out of that business. And I had a competitor call me and say, hey, Tim, we want you to do all the things that you did for your prior firm for us. And so basically, here's a blank check. And so it was nirvana. So I hired a couple of my old guys from the old firm. We built the company down in Mexico. We ended up doing a number of additional things, built a bunch of additional business units. I became an owner of that firm. And then we executed a sale to private equity in 2014.
Wow, what a story. Do you mind if I ask which firm, or is it private?
Forsyth Partners. It's basically the private equity arm for Barry Waymiller Packaging, which is like a big $2 billion global packaging firm.
Wow. That's quite a story. How is starting up a company and selling it?
Well, it gives you a lot of, it's so much fun. It gives you a lot of insight into really what goes on in the startup world. And then, when you come through and now having been on the other side of the private equity piece and now advising a number of private equity firms, you figure out what are all the real challenges that take place. And so those are, those in and of themselves could be, hour-long discussions on your show. But suffice to say, I'll say it was quite an interesting experience. Learned a lot. Definitely have some lessons learned as a result of it. But overall, was a very positive, learning experience.
Yeah, that's incredible. I'm very curious to hear what they're thinking about in the current landscape in terms of what's attractive, what's not. Do you have any insight into how folks in the sponsor world are thinking about insurance right now? Is there anything that's super attractive all of a sudden, or has changed in its attractiveness to the industry because of what's going on?
So I think, and to provide a little bit of context, maybe, we should back up, 10 or 12 years. So there's only really been investment monies coming into the insurance business for the last, 12 to 15 years.
Sure.
Insurance, being a regulatory product, it's got to, it's very stable in the fact that it's going to be around. And so there's a lot of attractiveness in having, that as part of a diversified portfolio, right? So what I see is you've got a number of middle market companies, 10 to 100 million in annual revenue that need all the basic business stuff, strategic planning, financial forecasting, better tools and, better processes and systems. And so private equity sees this space as very lucrative. And so they've jumped in with both feet. And so there's been a lot of capital investment in the last, like I said, 12, 15 years. I think, it's still a very attractive market. I think there obviously are some very large consolidations going on. I mean, Sedgwick is now a multi-billion-dollar company, which, didn't really even, didn't exist nearly in that form, 10 years ago.
Right.
And then even on the service provider side, I mean, Invista, which, is the old LWG Consulting, which is what I was part of, has acquired a number of additional firms. JS Held, here in the last 5 years has executed, I believe, 15 different acquisitions. So there's a lot of activity in the space.
Wow. I could listen to a podcast just of you talking about that for the next hour, but I'm going to restrict or tamper that a little bit because I think there's so many facets of it that would each, to your point, have their own show. Would love to know, stepping back a little bit in terms of your history, there's also a book in there. Would love to know a little bit more about what kind of drove that, if we can step out of already having a crazy history in the entrepreneurship world. why did you decide to write a book? Can you explain to folks a little bit more about what it's about, and any color that would be fantastic.
Sure. So I had parts of the book written in various formats, articles that had been published in magazines or things that we had used internally for training or even some external client facing stuff. Probably, I would say about 40 to 50% of it was in some form or fashion already on paper. But one of my colleagues and actually one of my employees from both of my firms passed away from cancer in 2017. And so, I believe that as I get older, and part of the adjunct professor thing is I believe that, we all should want to leave some sort of legacy. And so my thought was I wanted to create a legacy for him and really kind of carry on what I believe to be some of the wonderful parts of his life and his background. So Tony was a phenomenal individual. He's a mechanical engineer from Venezuela. And, if you look at me and you look at a, mechanical engineer from Venezuela, we should never be really good friends just because we have nothing in common. But we bonded over a mutual love of forensic engineering. And so when he passed away from cancer, I wanted to do something to honor his memory. So I wrote the book literally over that holiday season. I speak every year at the Hermes Energy Risk Conference, which is in Houston in March. And so I wanted to have it published in time for that conference to release it. And so, yeah, that was the motivating factor behind writing the book, and also the desire to, like I said, to leave a legacy of some sort, to hopefully shortcut the learning curve for everybody that comes behind us, to understand what this world looks like. Because frankly, it took us 5 or 8 or 10 years to start to figure it out. So hopefully we can shorten that for others.
When you say to figure it out, what was the kind of journey there, or what didn't you get at the start?
Well, I think anybody, that doesn't, doesn't major in insurance or major in finance, I've now got an MBA, but I think, the way I look at it is really, you don't understand the insurance business model. So you really don't understand from an outsider's perspective how the insurance company really makes money. And so your ability to provide strategic consulting to them is fairly limited. If you don't know how they make money and make net profit, then how you relate to them there's a fundamental disconnect there. So I think figuring out really how they make money, what their internal processes and procedures look like, and how you strategically add value at different pieces of that chain, and then how you communicate that are really the important parts of what we do. But what I found being, on the forensic engineering and service provider side is I had clients that spoke insurance that knew exactly what they needed to understand from a policy perspective. But then I've got a bunch of incredibly smart engineers on the other side that speak engineering, that know what they need to do from a technical perspective, but neither one speaks each other's language. So I ended up being the guy in the middle to essentially learn both worlds and be able to communicate between the two.
Incredible story. If I was to borrow a phrase from The Office from Michael Scott, could you explain what forensic engineering is to me as if I'm 5 years old?
Sure. So the easiest way to explain forensic engineering is we are the crime scene investigation folks of real life. We are the modern day detectives. When there's an insurance claim, there's always a question of how is it caused, and sometimes it's very obvious, like a catastrophe event. But then there's things like mechanical failures, fires, other structural collapses where there's a lot of unknown as far as what exactly was the root cause. And so forensic engineers at their core are engineers that are designed to go into a project where there's been some incident that has happened and figure out any one of a number of answers. So number one is, what is the root cause of the problem? Number two, who is responsible for that issue? Are there any contributing factors which were a part of that incident? And then there's a number of ancillary possible policy discussion questions that we can talk about as well. But at its core, it's, we have some event that happened. How in the heck did this occur? And so forensic engineers fundamentally figure that out. So we're the Sherlock Holmes and, like I said, the CSI guys that figure out what happened, when something crazy.
So you're applying to replace the Dos Equis guy as the most interesting man in the world?
Well, I like to believe that we have a lot of really good stories, and several folks have mentioned some of the stories that I put in the book that they really appreciated, and sort of the storytelling aspect. But yeah, it's what the most fun thing about being a forensic engineer is the types of projects you get involved in. It's something different every day. You never get the same incident twice, and right. So fundamentally, looking at 1,000 different projects over the span of a few years, you figure out the process is the same, but each case has its own nuances, its own policyholders, its own, contributing people, its own contractors that may be involved if it's a construction case. And so the personalities are always different. The aspects of the incident are always different, but the process to figure it out is always the same. And so what you become as a forensic engineer is you become an expert in the process, and then you put all the variables together.
Right. Very interesting. Is that an area that you think you'd expand upon if you had to write a second book in terms of what the future holds there, or if you were to focus on something as a next step, I suppose, or the future, either in this world or something else that's really interesting to you? What do you think that would be?
Yeah. It's funny when you when you write a book, then you'll have some people come to you that have read it and say, well, hey, we should write a book about this and that, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So I've already had some of my engineering buddies that have said we should do a book on basically a deep dive into technical investigation, because they're geeks, right? And they want to start to uncover some of that stuff. So they want to dive into, let's talk about finite element analysis, let's talk about fatigue cycles, let's talk about all these wonderful engineering, cool little geeky engineering things. And I think there's definitely an audience for that to some extent. And large complex losses, it's a whole different animal than a typical personal, or residential policy claim. And so there's a number of people in the world that work on those that I think, they're like us. They like to geek out on those kind of things because they're just so interesting and fun. So that might be a second book down the road. But I've got a couple of other books that are already on the development shelf as well.
Super interesting. And that makes a ton of sense. A little bit of a different tact, but if you were to start from scratch, knowing everything you know now, would you still go down the route you think of forensic engineering, or start with something different, given that you've uncovered something on the path?
That's a loaded question, right? So I absolutely love my wife. I love my life. I love my son. So I'm afraid that if I were to say that if I went down a different path, that a lot of those things wouldn't have happened.
I see.
But if I was 22 years old and had just graduated college, I'd probably, if I could design it in my head, I'd probably go do a stint in London. I'd probably go do a stint in Germany with Munich Re, and then I'd go international. And
yeah, very cool.
And I think that would provide all the platform that I would need to create just an incredible career.
Yeah, I think it makes a ton of sense. I wanted to double click on the great career that you have right now as well, and just ask there's a few aspects that I'd love to dig into. First, what's kind of a key metric or key area of success in that? You touched on some of it, but specifically, how do you know you've done a good job as a forensic engineer?
Yeah, so that's really easy, right? So it's client retention, client engagement, repeat business. If you do a really good job for them once, they call you back. What I found really nice, especially about working in the large complex law spaces, they're all subscription policies. So, you've got, 10 or 12 or 15 people in New York that are involved in the claim. You've got another, 25 or 30 that might be involved in the claim from London's perspective, and possibly even, Switzerland or Germany as well. And so when I did work for, what I consider to be a primary client, like an AIG, for example, on a large loss in somewhere in Latin America, and then 3 months later, I get a phone call from a guy in Germany saying, hey, Tim, we really want you to go check out blah, blah, blah. And I say, well, okay, would love to, but how do you know who I am, right? I mean, I've never met you in my life. Oh, we were on, this policy, and you were involved in, in this prior claim, and we really liked the job that you guys did and the report that you put together and how you explained it. So that's, obviously very flattering to have people that you didn't even necessarily know from a first name basis, or definitely didn't seek out from a sales process perspective, to call you and say, we've already seen your work. We want you to do more of it.
Right. And that's a great segue into a slightly related question, in that if you're someone in your shoes, or if you're someone looking to work with the insurance world, is it high touch like that typically across the board? Is that really the only way in, or you suggest that as the main way in to insurance companies, is getting some foothold of experience with them and then kind of growing on that and word of mouth referrals? Or how have you grown your business?
I think it depends on what it is you're gonna do, right? So I think if you're gonna go for what I'll call the low severity, high volume play, like in the residential lines business, developing more of a software application makes all the sense in the world, and really a scalable, repeatable business model, because there it's very price driven. But definitely on the large complex side, I mean, when you're dealing with hundreds of millions or a few $1 billion in potential loss, frankly, they could care less if your hourly rate is $2.95 or $3.95 an hour, because it's minuscule compared to what they're going to pay, and the value that you're ultimately going to provide is so much greater. Definitely in the high volume, low severity play, it's getting better with technology. I mean, it used to be that 20 years ago, we'd go and talk to Allstate insurance adjusters and pick up a new vehicle accident claim that might only be, $1,500 or $2,000 in revenue. But, a lot of that's going the way these days, and the commoditization has happened. But in the high severity, low volume world, it's definitely still a lot about personal relationships. I mean, it's still a who do you know game. And especially even when you talk about subsets of like the energy business, for example, I mean, realistically, there's about 75 people globally that I really need to know if I want to play in the high, large loss energy market.
Interesting. You kind of touched on a few things there that reminded me of a conversation I just had with a PE shop, and it was that the ROI on the decision to engage with a given provider or a given vendor really depends on the dollars out versus dollars in. Is pretty simple. So in the case of something increasing premiums, that's pretty obvious. If you can do the math or show that you're increasing premiums more than your cost, it's a no-brainer. But cost cutting is a little bit more of a soft subject or high touch, where it's less clear what the ROI is there. Do you consider yourself more of the kind of revenue generation from having an ability to implement a type of process that makes the insurance company known for being great at handling claims investigations and things like that? So do you see yourself as a revenue guy, or do you see yourself as a cost guy? And has that impacted your career, you think, in any way?
Yeah. So for anybody on the claims investigation side, we're all cost guys. None of us are revenue generation folks. That'd be, the broker side of the business. And I talk about in the book really kind of how the business model works. But frankly, on the claims side, the only thing they care about is, can you do it faster, better, cheaper? Because, we've already got, combined loss ratios that our actuaries have already determined what loss ratio we can sustain with the given book of business that we've written. So we know we're going to pay out, $89 for every $100 in claim premium. And so my chief claims officer has got to, both his internal staff as well as the loss, payouts has got to come up to that number. And so for any investigation process, you've got to show my net benefit to you is going to be either A, save you total claim payout, or B, I'm going to be faster, better, or cheaper than my competition. And I think, frankly, the easiest thing for us to measure was when I would get a claim in, I'd say, okay, well, what's the claim amount that they're claiming right now? So they'd tell me whatever the number is, 750 million, 500 million, et cetera. And then I would document that. And then I also document ultimately what the payout was. Get some nice trend analysis to say, on average, because of our involvement, I was able to save, 40% or 38% per, potential loss amount because of the way that we manage the claim process on behalf of the carriers. And so that becomes demonstrable evidence for what our value really is. I think, depending on the line of business, it was anywhere between a 22 and a, 38%, improvement. And so, when you're looking at writing a check for your insured, to your insured for 500 million, but you ultimately write a check for, 220, well, hell, that's a, quite a potential savings there. Right. So, but we're all, at the end of the day, fundamentally, we're all cost guys. So,
right.
Yes, I'm going to increase costs on the claims expenses side, but I better decrease costs on the, gross loss payout. And, we haven't even touched on the fraud aspect, but, almost every insured is always going to ask for everything in the kitchen sink. Policy may not provide for all of that if it's not full replacement coverage. And obviously in large commercial policies, it gets even more, nuanced than that. But from a big general perspective, our numbers, always need to come on the positive side to show what the net, benefit to the insurance carrier is. And frankly, too, I mean, what we find from the policyholder side is they think it might take them, 6 or 8 or 12 or 15 months to rebuild a plant. Well, because we've rebuilt plants for 25 years, I know how to do it in 8. And so if I can get them back up in business quicker than they think they can get there on their own, because I've got, already a supply chain built, or already know how to do, a value engineering type project, well, then I can shortcut their revenue loss as well. And so they're also incentivized to engage with us because they know we can get them back in operation more quickly than they could on their own. So even though there's an added cost in our services, the fact that we're going to save them, 3 months of downtime, with a fractional increase in professional services means there's still a net benefit to the policyholder.
Yeah, that makes sense. We play in that world as well. And I think it's a case of having to try and figure out how to frame the provision of services as, yes, a cost, but at the same time, to your point, the net benefit is obvious in X, Y, and Z ways. Combined ratios is a great way to go about it, which brings me to the next kind of impromptu question based on that. And that is, what do the firms with the best combined ratios that you've seen, what do they do that differentiates them from those with maybe not so great combined ratios?
I mean, obviously those numbers change every year, but I mean, I look at the numbers that AM Best, obviously publishes. And so, I mean, FM Global is historically, on the low end of that. Swiss Re generally does a pretty good job as well. Obviously, FM Global, because they're a mutual, firm company, they've got a fundamental value or fundamental vested interest in helping their policyholders be really good at what they do. So they've got a whole value engineering chain that comes in on their risk management side that keeps those costs down. And the fact that everybody in FM Global feels like they're a pool of, this shared risk. There's less of a, incentive, I'll say, to want to just, extraordinarily, exaggerate claims. Although that still, does happen. When Thailand's flood happened, had a large insured out there, it was a $2 billion loss, asked for the, full policy value. I think we ended up selling for about 450 million. But still they asked for the big check, right? So that still does happen. But I think, but when you look at the processes that they help their policyholders put in place from a safety, from an engineered risk perspective, they're far and away better than what you have in general industry. I mean, one of the things that I found so much fun about Latin America is simply it's a developing world, right? So the standards for safety and engineering and some of these other aspects that we take for granted in the UK or in the States is they're just not to that level yet. And so, there's fundamentally some gaps in the way that they do business down there and the way that things are processed, the way that things are manufactured. And that creates a larger claims environment, which for forensic engineers, we love because we get to, go down there and play a lot more. But you find that there's, insurance and engineering is an evolution over time. So, in the States and in UK, we've gotten very, very good at it because we've been doing it for a long time. But in developing countries, it's still kind of more the Wild West. We're still kind of figuring it out. We haven't, gotten nuanced policies, and we haven't gotten as sharp with our pencils in some of the developing countries as we have in some of the developed places. And, for a number of different reasons. One in Latin America being that, you have the rule of law down there until they don't want to follow it. And so, in the States and in the UK, at least we have the rule of law to, always have kind of as a backstop. But when you, when you have courts and others that don't really follow the rule of law, it does make, a contract difficult to enforce.
So a little bit of a random question, but if I was to give you $100 million to go start an insurance company, what would be kind of the key focus areas for you, either to deploy that money or just kind of as a way to thrive? It can be in any type of policy. It can be across all policies. If you just had to design one from the ground up with an unlimited or pretty close to an unlimited budget, how would you think about that?
Oh, man. Yeah, that's a great question.
I could refine it a bit because I think a big area that I'm curious on your views about is within technology, which you touched on. I'm trying to frame it from the insurance company's perspective, although there are quite a few folks who listen to this who are also on the vendor side. What is exciting or what is important to an insurance company such that it makes sense for them to dive into a relationship with a vendor over it? So in your case, forensic engineering, in our case, claims management. Everyone has something kind of similar, but it all touches on having to have that ROI there or have that value add there in some way. So I guess as an insurance company, how would you think about what kind of makes sense in that department or how to pitch it to folks in that same seat that kind of would fit in with a bigger overall performance of that insurance company?
Sure. Okay. Well, yeah, I can definitely attack that a little better, I guess. Thank you for the rephrasing. So the challenge that we have with insurance companies, One is because there's regulatory pieces involved, they are connected to, in the case of the states, 50 different state commissions, right? And for the most part, there's still a lot of legacy technology involved in that connection. And even so, internally within the insurance companies, they've now amassed mountains of data over the course of however long they've been in existence. But unfortunately, they're typically in disconnected, siloed systems. And so, without a doubt, the fact that we've got cloud technology coming into play these days, and really creating a common application layer where we can connect everything together, is really the game changer for insurance companies. Once you can, even from a claims perspective, I mean, most claims adjusters are totally used to entering claims data 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 times. Once we, take that away and you enter it once and it seamlessly flows through the entire claims process, frankly, we speed up the claim, which is, less cost, less overhead on the insurance carrier side, less friction from the policyholder side. And so everybody benefits. The overall claims costs come down, and then obviously whatever the cost to implement that solution, is got to be the cost benefit analysis that's performed. But I believe, and I mean, I think you're already seeing it. There's a wave of technology, going into the insurance carriers these days that are just fundamentally transforming the way that some of them do business. The challenge is you've still got that connectivity to the state commissions, and you've got that a lot of those siloed pieces of data. And so it's going to be a slow moving, thing. You can't just go into an insurance company tomorrow and do a digital transformation and expect that in a year or two they're going to be fundamentally different. It's a minimum, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10 year engagement process. But on the backside of that, they're going to be fundamentally better. So I think, if I wanted to invest in an insurance company today, I'd look, for sure at like some of the technology startup service providers, because they can bring some really neat pieces of the puzzle together. The challenge is them navigating the bureaucracy that's inherent within the larger insurance companies and actually getting to a person that says, yes, we want to deploy it. And then I've got the gravitas to actually make that happen within the organization.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think all of us in this space probably know how long these contracts last, how long the relationships last, how tough it is to implement a piece of B2B tech across a massive enterprise, the changing the wheel while you're driving kind of analogy from getting everything you're using in one system to another. All these things kind of snowball into making it pretty tough to adopt a new piece of tech. So that was why I suppose I was focused on finding out from your perspective what was one area that kind of is worth going through all that for. And it sounds like some combination of interoperability and automation would drive those goals, or the key metrics that we talked about earlier. Those loss ratios should be lower because, to your point, less time on claims, less time that you have to deal with vendors, and both time and money is saved through having one entry versus 4, to your point. So I think that was a really astute observation. And both from the perspective of a startup and an insurance company, I think it's valuable to know that kind of information, because from their perspective, it's what do we spend our time on. From ours, it's what do we develop, because it's also a pretty rigorous process to develop even a basic feature for an enterprise grade client. So good to know. And I think that's right. Really helpful. If you'll deal with this, we'd love to ask you some softer, or I guess kind of inside the actor studio style questions if you're open to it.
Sure.
Just a couple then can absolutely let you off the hook. So first is, would you say you have a claim superpower? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, my claim superpower is understanding the bigger picture, and then, taking a really complex, gnarly, mess, typically, a large project claim, and dividing it up into editable chunks and figuring out, here's our end game. It's a Stephen Covey begin with the end in mind thing. Here's where we ultimately need to arrive at. Here's what we've got today. What's the process and the path for us to get there? That's my claim superpower.
That's awesome. Only other soft question, I suppose, before asking for final or parting thoughts is, what is your spare time? What does it look like? What are you doing it? We'd love to know how you focus on your spare time when you're not doing this.
Well, so I have a 7-year-old, so I'm a football coach, basketball coach, baseball coach, swim coach, golf coach, swim coach. My wife, we love to do hiking and go on family trips, and so we do a lot of that. And then I'm obviously still doing some writing. I've got a book that is about 80 pages in that's actually for my son. We titled it For the Love
That's
of
awesome.
Caleb. So we're basically documenting a book for his life. And we'll give it to him as a birthday gift when he turns 18. So I've written the end, and I've written, up to 7 years old at this point. And then I've got some other, like I said, I've got a couple other books that are in some various stages at the moment. And then obviously do quite a bit of public speaking and teaching as well.
That's awesome. This is actually not scripted, but just curious, do you have a favorite author or anyone that you kind of look to for inspiration on that side?
Oh yeah, I mean, I use Jim Collins almost daily in conversations. If you haven't read Good Great, it's a phenomenal book for small and medium-sized businesses out there. They should read the E Myth or the E Myth Revisited. Both of
Hmm.
those help you understand where you really are in your entrepreneurial journey. And I'm a huge Simon Sinek fan. I mean, I'm an avid business reader anyway. So I mean, I consume probably on average, 2 to 3 or 4 books a month. But yeah,
Wow.
Jim Collins, Simon Sinek, any one of those guys will start you down the road.
I 100% agree. The on the bus, off the bus analogy from good to great has been super helpful, and also kind of similar to the approach private equity takes as well. So good for everyone from that industry to just general startup industries to kind of know about. So you are preaching to the choir. And I guess final thing is any parting thoughts, maybe what you're excited about in the future or you personally. But other than that, would love to know how people can get in touch with you and where they can find this great book. I've ordered it as a print copy, so I can't wait for it to come. It's coming from the UK, so I'm expecting it in about 3 days. But yeah, any parting thoughts on how to get in touch would be fantastic.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. The book is on Amazon, so it's easy to find there. I hope that your listeners have enjoyed this program. They're welcome to reach out to me. I mean, you guys can call me at 210-632-4571 or email me at timc@expressinfo.com, or I'm on LinkedIn and I'm pretty easy to find there as well. I think what I'm most looking forward to is us getting past this Corona mess. Because we're big fans of both national and international travel. So we've already booked our hotel for South Padre for July 4th, I've got actually our 10-year wedding anniversary is in August, so we've got Hawaii already booked. So I had promised my wife if we made 10 years, I'd take her back to Hawaii because that's where we did our honeymoon. And so since she's kept me around, I now need to make good on that promise. So we've got Hawaii booked for August. So getting past
That's
all this
awesome.
and back to normal life is what we're looking forward to.
Can I ask where in Hawaii?
This time we're doing Kauai and Maui.
Nice, beautiful. I just got engaged in Maui, so lovely spot.
Oh,
And yeah, my fiance, we were together for 10 years before that, so a little bit of a parallel for you.
there you go. Excellent.
Yeah, so
Well,
appreciate
congratulations.
this. Thank you. Thank you, Tim. Appreciate your time. This has been awesome. I am definitely going to try and schedule a follow-up if you're open to it with some of the other topics you talked about. Super interesting, from private equity to tech to when you're building your rocket ship. So I'm very excited to say that hopefully that's in the future. But otherwise, it's been a pleasure, Tim. Thank you for doing such a great job of sharing your insights with our community and our listeners. It's been fantastic, and look forward to hopefully having you on again.
Happy to come on, Matt. Thank you for the invite, like I said. And yeah, happy to come back at any time, 100%.
Thanks, Tim.
Take care.